So first, just to get us all on the same page, for those who are new to SketchUp, maybe this will be new. I'll use a term called geometry, which is going to refer to edges, such as what I'm drawing now with the line tool, and faces. You have to have a closed loop of edges to be able to get a face. And so this is all geometry, everything I've got selected there. Geometry is sticky. So if I, for example, add on that shape there to the box I had drawn originally, you see there's no line here, and there isn't one at the bottom. That's all one lump. So in a sense, you could think of this as like working with really wet clay. When you do something, here I've just drawn a circle and I'm going to use push-pull and push that through. I'm making modifications to that geometry. So if you were trying to do something like drawing, say, a table, and I'm not worrying about dimensions at this stage. Oops, let's pull that up. And I'm going to use move copy to make another copy. Imagine those are some legs. Oops. We'll put that back where it came from. And then you want to put an apron in between. That apron is now part of the legs. It'd be a little bit more like you cut that out of a hunk of plywood or something. Or a big block of wood rather than 3 discrete pieces. So the way you get around that is you have to put a wrapper around the geometry, and that is done by making either a group or a component. I'm going to make this a group to start with. So there's a group. You can see over here in entity info it's just called, well, it's called solid group. It doesn't have a name at this stage. You could type in a name if you want. You can make a copy of it, and if you now I can make that a group, and they are still 3 distinct parts. So you could make an exploded view, for example. The downside, one of the downsides of using groups is that if you edit one, so for example, if I just put a hole in this thing just to show that I'm making a change, so I'll come back to this black dotted box, but this one doesn't get a hole. And by the way, what I did here is I opened the group for editing, so this black dotted box shows the wrapper open. The analogy that I usually use is, imagine you have a sandwich and you get a great big dill pickle out of the refrigerator and you set it on top of the sandwich. The juice from the pickle is going to soak into the bread and change the sandwich. If you would wrap the sandwich in saran wrap first, then you can put the pickle on top and the juice can't get to the bread and change your sandwich. So, but if you wanted to put mustard on your sandwich, if you put it on the wrapper, that's not really putting it on the sandwich. You have to open the saran wrap first to be able to put the mustard on. By the way, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and just chime in. Let me undo that. So I'm just hitting Control Z here to undo that. So again, groups form wrappers around geometry to keep things separated. Let's do this. I'm going to get rid of that, so I'm just deleting that. I'm going to convert that to a component just by making it a component. And actually, before I continue with that, the same thing applies to groups. I don't have this group open for editing, or this component open for editing, and you can see where, so I haven't pushed the hole through this time like I did the last time. That cylinder doesn't do anything to the component. If I open that, and I'm just double clicking, by the way, to open that, double clicking with the select tool. You can see that now I've edited both copies of that component in exactly the same way. So if this was a table leg and you wanted to put mortises in it, any other copies of that table leg would get the mortises in exactly the same way. So that, I'm sorry?
How do you distinguish between, excuse me, how are you distinguishing between groups and components?
Well, once you've made it, it's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it here. You can see it is a component in the entity info window. Mm-hmm. And by the way, so I'm using SketchUp 2016 on the PC, and there's this default tray, and it contains the entity info window. If you are using an earlier version, or you're using it on a Mac, you can pull up the entity info window from the window menu. And then it shows you information about whatever it is you've got selected. Since I made this component from a group, it's just calling it, the definition name is group number 1. If I make another one, so I selected everything there by triple clicking on it, hit the G key, and I can give it a name, call it leg, for example, and so that name shows up there. So it's difficult to tell just by looking at your model, unless you specifically make a change and watch for that change to be propagated elsewhere in the model. It's difficult if you're using both groups and components. And that's a common complaint that I hear from people when I say always use components. There are a lot of people who have learned to use SketchUp where they've been taught to make a group first and then make it a component. And then they say, but then sometimes I find out I forgot to make it a component, so I just leave them all groups, or I can't remember that it's a component, so when I go to edit one of them, other copies get edited too. And there are some people that teach that you make a group if there's only going to be one of them in the model. Otherwise, you make it a component. And what I've found works best for me is to make every single part a component instead of using groups at all. I have never found a case where it actually made more sense to make a group than a component. And I can find all kinds of advantages for components that groups don't give you. So did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. One other complaint that I hear is people say, well, it takes so long to make a component. So they don't want to spend the time typing a name. I just hit the G key. If I just hit enter, here's my new component. Just it's automatically given a name of component number 1. If I were to draw something else and give it a name, you see it's going to be called component number 2. And it shows up. The cool thing is there's this, let me close the second window for the moment. There's this components window that shows you the components that you've got in the model. You'll notice that this doesn't show up because it's a group. There is no groups window, there's only a components window. And if you want another copy of a component, you can pull that out of here if you want to do that. All right.
Dave.
Yes.
Again, you're selecting that geometry and hitting Control G or Control C?
Just, to make it a component?
Make it a component, yeah.
Just G. If you look under the edit menu, because you could access it from the edit menu if you wish, it'll show you that the keyboard shortcut is G. That's the default keyboard shortcut for make component. I don't know why G, but that's what it is. And again, you don't have to give the parts names if you don't want to. If you make, I'm just going to make another group over here, and so make group, and you see this one is called solid group, and so is this one. It's kind of hard to identify which one is which in the model. You know, if you were looking at entity info, it would be hard to know what you were looking at there. If all the parts have the same name, it's kind of hard to, I mean, it's kind of like having a recipe where everything is called the same thing. You know, you put in 3 pounds of stuff and then add that, add 2 cups of stuff to it and stir it, and, you know, a tablespoon of stuff. It's kind of hard to know what that is. But you can, even if you don't type names, you get different names, unique names for each component that you create in the model space. So, and again, editing one instance of a component means that all other instances in the model will get edited. And also notice that the thumbnail in the components window in the in model library got updated. So if I put another hole in here, you can see that this got updated to show that, which makes it nice because you can find those things graphically in that window too. One of the things that I do when I'm drawing, because I'm using components, is I think about how to keep things related as long as possible and only separate them. So there's, I should have mentioned this first, there is a way to avoid editing all copies of a component by right-clicking and choosing Make Unique. So I just made this one unique, and now there's a new, this one is called group 4, number 4, because I made that from the group. Here's that original group number 1 component. And now if I edit this one, you can see that the other 2 didn't get modified. Pardon me, I'm going to delete all of those things and I'm going to start over so I don't have any components that are named group, because I don't want to make that confusing. So there is a component, let's call it leg. Well, we have all these other things in the model. We won't call it anything. Whoops. Yeah. Leg 1. Pardon me, I'm going to do another thing. One thing about the components window too, or the components, is that they don't disappear from the in-model library just because you've deleted them from the space. So if you were to inadvertently delete a component, you haven't lost it. You can always get it back. If you delete a group and then later on discover that you didn't mean to delete that, you'll have to remake it. You can purge unused, so there's a little details menu way over on the right hand side of the components window, and if there are unused components in the model, you can purge them, which I just did there. So I got rid of all of those other components. So what I was saying about the Make Unique thing is these 2 legs, maybe these are the front legs of a table. You could leave those 2 related to each other. Maybe the back legs are going to get different treatment, but they're physically the same size. So you could copy those back to make the same, make additional legs. So you don't have to draw all 4 legs. You just draw 1. I'm going to undo that. Are there any questions about that part? About
Dave, if you make one unique, can you make it unique later?
Not directly. What you end up doing is replacing the component. Let me do that, because that there's 2 things there that kind of useful. I'm going to draw a diagonal across the top of this leg, just to think of this as a cabinet maker's mark. If you have problems keeping track of orientation, you can put marks like this on, just like you would in the shop, to identify parts. So let's say that this is our table leg. I'm going to make a copy of it over here. And notice I'm moving it in the red direction. So I want a mirrored copy of that. And for a lot of people, their approach would be to turn it this way, which would be great, because if you, well, it would seem great, because if you put a mortise on that side, on the inside face of that leg, you get one in the same place on the other one. However, if you orbit around to the back and you put a mortise in for the side apron, you end up with it on the front. And probably at least one of you has done this. I know I have. You forget, and you get forget to mirror one of the parts in the shop. So instead, let me undo all of that stuff and undo that rotation, instead of rotating it, you right click on it and choose flip along, in this case the red direction. By the way, the component has its own axes that are aligned with the model axes when you make that. So again, if I put the mortise in there, I'm not making it very deep obviously, and I put one here, and you see I've got the mortises in the proper places on the mating leg. Alright, so that's a flip along on mirroring command, but let me undo those for a moment, those mortises, and make the back two legs from the front two. This would make a pretty homely table, I think. So this time I'm going to flip along the green direction. It's the direction that I just moved in. So now the side apron mortises would all be the same. So I get those mortises in the right places on all four legs. But then let's assume that the drawer is going to have the table is going to have a drawer in the front. So you're going to have maybe a little mortise. Whoops, and now see, I just put a little mortise in the back legs too, which I didn't want to do. So if I select a pair of these, like the two front ones, I want them to get treated the same, but I want the back ones to not get the same treatment now. Right click and choose Make Unique. Breaks the relationship between the front and the back legs. Michael, I hope you get to feeling better.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to log off and hopefully find the recording later or tomorrow.
All right. I will see when I can get that up. I don't even know exactly what I have to do to the recording after I get it made. So, but
okay. Well,
feel better.
You can post a link. Yeah, post a link in the thread for the video on NCWW. All right.
Yep, will do. Take care.
Okay. Thank you. Good night, gentlemen.
Bye.
So now I've got that mortise for the lower rail, and let's do this. We'll get rid of that line because we don't need it, and I'm not going to spend any time laying out a dovetail here, but we'll just make a dovetail that looks sort of like a dovetail. So that would be typical of, the layout there. But now these back legs aren't getting any of those details. They're still related to each other, though. So we could put in the mortises for the rear apron.
How did you separate the front two from the back two?
I selected in this case, I selected the front two, and then I right-clicked and I chose Make Unique, which isn't available now because there's nothing to make unique. They're already unique from the front ones. If I select one of these, you can see Make Unique is available in there now. So for me, what that allows me to do when I'm drawing is think about how I could batch operations in the shop. For something like legs, well, if they're going to be tapered legs, they're probably all going to get the same taper. The mortises for the side aprons would be the same, but at some point the front ones and the back ones have to kind of split in the production process, right? So I try to draw things in sort of the same way and with the same sort of mindset that I would want to use in the shop. And when I get to the shop, I've already done this once in SketchUp. So I have a very clear idea of where in the process these things have to get separated, if they're going to get separated at all. So for me, it just seems like it improves my efficiency in the shop. I limit machine setups, and especially repeating machine setups. You know, if you're just thinking front legs and then you're thinking back legs, you know, you make the front pair and then you go back and you make the back pair, you're duplicating a lot of setups and things. So does anybody...
I was taught, remember Dave, told you I was taught 100 years ago. It's called design intent. Think through your thing before you draw it.
Yeah. And this gives you that opportunity to think through the building process. Kind of a handy way to work, I think. Let me see what I might have missed in my notes up to this point.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
Jason, I've got a quick question for you on your components.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your front legs and you've got your rear legs. Let's say, for example, you wanted to make one of your front legs to be like the rear leg for whatever reason. Is there a replace component for you?
There is. Yes, there is, and that was the thing I was going to get to here. I wanted to get to next because we kind of alluded to that. So this component is leg 1 in the back. Let's say you want to make this front one identical to that one. So you select the one that you want to change, and then you find in the components window, you find the one that you want it to be, and you right click and you choose replace selected. Now notice that it came in with the proper orientation, so that I don't have a mortise out here on the front. I've actually got the mortise on the back of that front leg. The reason for that is that components get their own axes and their own origin, and those the axes determine the orientation of the part when they get inserted in a case like this replace selection. So if I'll open this one back here, and you can see that the origin where the 3 axis lines cross is back here. That's on the back right corner, because that leg has been actually mirrored in 2 different directions. It's been mirrored in the green direction, and it's been mirrored in the red. The original component was in this position, and its axes were aligned with the global axes or the model axes. So when you bring a component in, oops, I shouldn't have done that. That put it inside that other component. Let's do that. It comes in with the original orientation. We'll look at that axis thing a little bit more later, but it is easy to replace components. Let me go to another model that I've got open. So this is the workbench that was in the Fine Woodworking Tools and Shops issue that came out in December. And what I'm going to do, so everything is a component. So even my drawer, and let me pull this one out. So that drawer is a component that contains components. It's what's called a nested component. So all the parts are in there, and then it's all wrapped up together, which makes it easy to pull the drawer out and show it. You don't have to go in and select all the parts. But that knob is a component. It has, and we'll come back to setting the location of the origin a little bit later, but you can see that what I've done here is I've set the component's origin at the back of the knob. If I go to X-ray mode here, you can see where how it's centered on the base of the knob. So let's do this. Let's select that knob. Components can be saved and reused, and so here I have a bin pull that I drew, and I could replace those turn knobs with the bin pull, or wouldn't be very appropriate on this bench, but we could put something fancier in there. And because these two drawers are instances of the same component, they each get the new drawer pull. I'll undo that before I forget and then save this model, which the wrong pulls. So that's a really powerful tool to be able to replace one component with another one. Any questions on that? It's got kind of quiet. So let's go to a different library and get something else. I don't know, we'll go in here and we'll take that knob. I just brought a knob in from one of my libraries, and now I'm going to set that to the in-model library. You can see that I actually brought in this other knob as well. So even components that you, for example, if you try a component in your model and then you decide you don't like it, it will stay in this in-model library, so you can bring that back. But components can be saved for future use, which is exactly why I have these two knobs. The easy way to save them is to open the second pane in the components browser and set that to a library. You can open or create a local collection, and you could create a folder that maybe it's going to be in your documents thing, and you can create a new folder and use that to as a place to store your components. Because I already have it set up, I'm going to use this library I call knobs and pulls. And then to save this, suppose we drew this knob that's selected here and wanted to save it for later use. You can just grab it from the in-model library and drag it down and drop it into the secondary pane. So now that knob would be available in that library for future use. Again,
and Dave, if you pulled that knob out of your library or somebody else's library and said, "Oh, I like everything but the front button on it," you could make that unique and put that modified.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, that might be a thing that you would do. You might have a variety of parts, or for example, this pull and this escutcheon plate they started out as the same thing. I just put the bail on this for the pull, and on this one I put the keyhole in it, and the little things to represent the nails for holding it, attaching that. So instead of drawing that plate twice, I just drew the escutcheon plate first, and then it's easy enough to modify that. You can open it for editing, and for example, if I didn't want that keyhole, I can just select it and delete it, and now it's just a plate without a hole. Or you could modify that keyhole shape if you wanted to, or the size of it, and maybe you then give it a new name. You could type a new name up here for it from the in model, and then save it into your library. And actually, it's the other one here. I have a whole bunch of screws. That screw there, and that screw there, and I don't know that one. Oh, that's the same size. I don't know why I have two of those. Those two anyway. There's some others here. Let's see. What have I got? Oh, that's a machine screw.
Hey, did you draw the screws or did you download them?
I drew them. That's the same thing too. And I drew these a long time ago. But so this is a number 4 screw. This is a number 8. That's 1.5 inches. That one's 2.5 inches long. But they all started out as this from the same component. I started out by drawing this long one and modified copies of it to make the other size screws as I need them. And then save them. So my in-model library would have the modified screw, and I could just select that thumbnail and add it into my hardware library for later use. Surely there's some more screws in here somewhere. Well, maybe they're not. I moved to a new, oh yeah, well this is a different, this is a panhead screw I needed for something. It's the same threads, just scaled to make a number 10 panhead screw. And there's a number 6 panhead screw. And they all started out from the same screw. And like I say, I just make them as I need them, modify and as I need it, and then I save it for later use. So I don't have to make them the next time I need them. And I'll tell you, I'd be, if you're doing drawings for yourself, I would strongly suggest that you don't bother with screws, certainly not as detailed as these. Maybe you make a little mark that indicates where a screw has to go, but probably for most of the applications where you would use screws, you really don't need to show that in your model. I have to show them in plans that I do because other people are working from those plans. See if I can find an example like here. So this is the exploded view of the base for this bench. So I have to show where screws go for those things. But if you were doing it for yourself, you probably would know where the screws go and wouldn't need to go to the trouble of putting them in. Of course, that's up to you. It'll be your model. You can do what you want, but you have to figure out where the return on the investment of your time in modeling, where does that taper off? And it's just adding details and not making you smarter. If that makes sense. Yeah, think about your audience when you're adding those details. One other thing about this business with this in-model library, I've seen some cases where people have had their computers crash, like power goes out while they're working, and some people will there's an autosave function that you can set in preferences. Some people will turn that off because they think that it slows them down when they're modeling, because every, say, 5 minutes, SketchUp performs an autosave, which I think is under General. Yeah, it's under General in the system preferences. However, if you aren't saving manually and you have a crash and you don't have the autosave running, you can lose a whole lot more time than the few seconds it takes for SketchUp to save, to do the autosave. I know of at least 2 people who were working on drawings and had crashes, and one guy, all he used were groups, and when he opened his SketchUp model, the window was blank and there wasn't a group to be found anywhere. And the other guy had been using a mix of groups and components. All his groups were gone, but he had all the components were in the in-model library, so it was just a matter of dragging those back out into the model space and putting them in the right place. So he didn't have to start entirely from the beginning. So that was a huge time saver for him. He did turn on autosave after that too. Decided he'd put up with the few seconds it takes every 5 minutes to save. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
This is Don Ward. Yeah, one of the things I noticed that I spend probably far more time than I should when I try to use SketchUp is when I'm trying to make a component, I spend a heck of a lot of time trying to dimension it. And, I get so frustrated in trying to deal with getting things precise. And I have a feeling that with using components, once I get one component done correctly, then, then everything else should fall into place pretty readily, I would hope.
Yeah, there are 2 things that come into this precision thing. One is if you go to Window Model Info and Units, a lot of people, when they first start out with SketchUp, they start using an architectural template, which has fairly coarse precision. Very often it's showing dimensions in architectural units, so that's feet and inches. If you're doing working in inches in the first place, and for woodworking projects, it's probably more sensible to use fractional, unless you like to use decimal. And my recommendation is to set the precision as high as it will go, which is a 64th. of an inch. I don't intentionally make anything with dimensions that show 64ths, but it's makes it easier to be precise when you're drawing, and it also makes it easier to detect problems with dimensions later. So, and then the other thing that I do is I leave it length snapping turned off.
Okay. Well, when you draw something, do you draw it first and then worry about the dimensions secondarily, or
No.
how do you do?
So let's say a little shaker table. So maybe we'll make the legs 1.5 inches square. Notice down in the lower right corner here the dimension. I typed 1.5 comma 1.5. The neat thing is you can mix your dimensions. So even though I'm working and I want fractional, or I use fractional inches, I can type them as decimals. But I hit enter and I get that square that's the right size. And now let's pull that up, and I don't know, we'll make it 18 inches. So I type the distance that I want. Now I just triple clicked on that. I'm going to make that a component, and I did that very quickly. I just hit G and hit enter. I should have probably given it a name, and I'll do that now. So I just type it in the entity info window. And so now the next thing for precision is, let's say that we know the outside to outside dimension for the legs is going to be 14 inches. So I just set a guideline out here from the green out at 14. And now I'm going to move this. I'm grabbing it by this corner. I'm just going to move that over till it snaps to the guideline. I don't need to know how far that is. I don't even care how far that is. What I know is that it's 14 inches from outside to outside. That's the important thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip that along the red direction, components red. And let's say we want it to be, we'll make it square. So 14 inches this way. Again, I don't need to know the dimension, or the actual dimension. I can move these components. So I hit Control here to invoke the copy function. Move that back till it snaps. When you get used to this, you'll think you can almost feel that snapping through the mouse. Notice that in the lower right corner it does show that I'm moving at 12.5 inches, but I don't really need to know that. I didn't have to calculate it. Calculating the 12.5 wouldn't be all that difficult, but the point is you don't have to do that. You just set things out. Okay. So how long does an apron have to, the side apron have to be?
Dave?
Yes.
You flipped that along the green direction. Why'd you do that?
So I flipped the two back ones along the green direction. Thank you for stopping me on that. So they're mirrored relative to the front ones. And I had flipped the right one on the red direction. And so the flip direction is really the axis color between the components. And if I put in the cabinet maker's mark, you can see they all have, it'd be like if you push them together and draw the diamond on the end.
Yep.
So
it's logical when you say it, but I would have flipped it along the blue direction to flip them face to back.
And actually flipping along the blue direction would have turned them, if I just flip one of them along the blue direction, would have mirrored it top to bottom.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we'll undo that. Okay, so how long do the aprons need to be? Well, Do we care? We don't really care at this stage. Let's say we know the aprons are going to be, so what I've done here is I've dragged out a long skinny rectangle, and I look at the dimensions in the dimension box in the lower right, and I see the small number is first, so I know I'm going to type the thickness followed by the width. And how long is it? I don't care. It's that distance. So I'm using push-pull and referencing from one leg to the other. And if you could stand the legs up in your shop when you're building your table, you set those out, that's how you'd go about getting your dimensions right. You'd take a stick and you'd hold it up there and make a mark. You wouldn't have to, you wouldn't even really care what the number is. You just, make a mark and cut to the mark. So if I make that a component and call it side apron, now I'm going to use inferencing here. I'm going to grab this at the middle. Just going to bring that over. That diagonal line happened to, I put that so it intersected at the midpoint of the edge. So there's the apron centered on the legs, and I'm going to copy that over. So this precision thing is entering numbers when you have to. It's drawing things to fit between what you've already placed. I know there's I've seen at least 2 different tutorials out there where they suggest drawing each part separately and then moving the parts together to assemble it. But then you'd have to know how long the apron has to be, right? Before you could complete drawing it. Here we don't care. It's just it's got to fit. Is all there is to it. Okay, so I move that in the red direction. So I'm going to flip that along the red, and it doesn't look any different. But you can see if I say draw something on the outside here, it's on the outside there.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I'm going to delete my little cabinet maker's mark now. So it keeps going on like that as far as just drawing the parts, and let's say we want to put a tabletop on this. Well, how do we get the tabletop on there and get it centered? Well, let's start by drawing it just to fit over the top of the legs. Give it some thickness. So I typed 3/4 inch or 0.75, and let's, oops, went the wrong way. There we go. And there's a top that's centered on the legs. No calculations, no futzing with where do you put it, how do you get it in there. And there. It's not a very sturdy table the way it is, but
Now, can you explode that with dimensions at some?
We could make an exploded view of it.
For building purposes, you're taking this to shops?
Yes. Actually, before we do that, let me show you, since I want to talk about components here, let me show you another thing where we can leverage components. So these aprons don't have any tenons on them. Maybe we want to put tenons on them. So one option would be you could pull an apron out and draw the tenons on there, but then you've got to put the apron back. Instead of doing that, what I do is pull a copy off. I'm going to go to X-ray only so you can see. I don't normally use X-ray for this, but I'm doing that so you can see that I'm putting tenons on there. And I'm going to use the offset tool here can go in 1/4 of an inch, so I just put a line in all the way around at 1/4 of an inch from the outside edges. And I don't know, we'll put it, well, that's a long tenon, but that's okay for this. And then I'll repeat the process. So I'm going to use offset again, and this time I can double click, and then, come on, you went backwards. So it normally comes out the other way. There. Okay, so I've put the tenons on those 2 aprons back in there while I was working on this one out here. And I'm finished with this one, so I can delete it. So I never moved the apron away from the legs. And since these legs are all related to each other, I'm just going to orbit inside here with the leg open for editing. I'm going to push that back to make the mortise, and let's zoom back here. So zoom extends. And there's a perfectly fitted mortise for our tenons, and all 4 legs have, if I hide these aprons, you can see all the legs have the mortises in the right place. Now, the downside of this is that you still have to handle all 4 legs in the shop to cut those mortises. But, you know, this is where you get your information from. It's not probably the final product, and so this isn't where you want to be spending all your time. So, okay, let's assume that I've got the whole table. I know we're going to kind of run a little long here. So what I'm going to do is this is the way I set these sorts of things up when I want to create the exploded view, is I made a copy now of all of those parts, and now that I can move these parts away from each other. I'll tell you, there are, I'm going to do those 3. You can just kind of decide how you want to do this, but there are a couple of plugins out there that will do exploded views, but I find them incredibly unintuitive, and they never seem to put the components where I need them to be for the exploded view that I want. And so I find it's just easier to create the exploded views manually. And then if you're going to do your dimensioning in SketchUp, you can use the dimension tool. I've customized my toolbar, so I don't have that dimension tool out, but you can do the dimensioning wherever you need it. So you can do that, and let me go to the workbench model. So that's how I did this. And so here's the 3/4 view of the bench with most of the parts visible. And this is what the rest of the model space looks like. And then what you do after you've created, so I create all the components, the entire bench is built and assembled. And again, it's built, even something as complex as this, everything is drawn in place. The only things that were drawn somewhere else are the bench vise parts, which most of them don't even show up here, but they do exist in the model because nope, that's not it. Somewhere, oh, vise. There's the rest of the vise. The business part of it. That was drawn for a different workbench a number of years ago, and I've got a chance to use it again. But so once all of those parts were drawn, then I could make copies and move them around to make the exploded views that I want. So every, there's the assembled view of the base, and there's the dead man. There's the drawer case exploded, and it's in the same position as the base, exploded base thing. It gets a little bit involved, but after all the components are created, then they get assigned to layers, and layers are used. Now this is different from some programs where layers separate entities. Layers don't do that. They only control visibility. And so here's my list of layers. You can see I don't have very many layers actually visible for this exploded drawer case view. It's just a few layers. Everything else is turned off because we don't need to see any of that stuff. But now here's so some people would say, I mentioned this earlier, that some people would say, well, if there's only one in the model, make it a group. So there's only one dead man in the model. There's only one bench top. However, there's more than one. See, where's the rest of it? Oh, it's in here. There's a dead man in here. There's an exploded view of the dead man someplace so that you can get, oh, it's in here too. So there's 3 copies of that, the board jack or dead man, whatever you want to call that thing, in the model space. So if you started out and made that a group because it was only one, and then you make a copy like this, now you need to change it. You have to go back and find the other copies to make the same changes.
What's the purpose of the groups?
Of groups? That's a really good question. Groups are designed to create that separation, so that you can make exploded views or whatever. But the problem is that there's all these benefits of components that groups don't get. The ability to edit one and have that editing go through all of them. The ability to save them for later use. There's also, I mentioned it a little bit, the ability to set the a component's axes and its origin location, because that creates an insertion point for the component, so that obviously I wouldn't normally want to have a knob there, but I'm going to put a knob. We'll use that bin pull. So you can just quickly locate where to put the component when you want to put it in there in the model if you want to do that. And I'm just going to move that off to the side here so we can see the back of it. And what I did when I created this component is I set its origin on the center line of these posts and at the center of the width of the pole. So that makes it very easy to locate that thing when you go to put it into the model. You can do that by, if you can either do that when you first make a component, or you can change the axis location. And if I do that here, put that in that way, I'm only modifying the one that's in the model. Oops, there's a whole lot of components now. So now I have to look through my list. There it is. Now you see when I drop it at that intersection, it's now off center. So if it's a component that you're going to reuse and it's something, you know, piece of hardware or something, you can think about where's the logical point to insert that. And
Dave, if you take a component out of your library, put it in your model, and modify it, does it modify the library?
No. It doesn't, which is fortunate, when that's why I could do things like make a new screw when I needed one of a different length or a different size. And then I could save that as a new thing. So we're not going to, if you, whatever, you're not going to hurt the original one that's in that library. You can replace it though. So if you discover that what you saved isn't really what you wanted, autosave here, it's not too late to fix it. So I'll just do this. So I've got this pull now. I've moved the axes on it twice now, but if I drag this down now from the in model to the knobs and pulls library, it asks me if I want to overwrite the existing file. So I don't want to do that here, so I'll just click no, but you can see that you could replace the original component in the library with a modified version of it if you want. If you give it a new name, if I call this now, select this here and call this, I don't know, bin pull new. So now that's got a different name. Hey you're not supposed to make me do that. Huh, that's interesting. It's not supposed to do that. Okay, Jason. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep, you too. Okay. I must not have made enough changes to that thing to get it to replace it.
That's okay. You answered the question.
Okay, good. So I'm keeping people later than I meant to. I didn't. Sorry about that. Let's see. Do I have anything else here? I mentioned nesting. And there was one thing I wanted to make a point about, mostly because this has come up about 6 times in the last month. People have sent me models that are having problems with things, and it's because they're doing nesting where they're putting, like I said here, I've got all these different components that make up this drawer, and then they're wrapped in another wrapper. And what I've seen recently, I'm going to go over here and just do this. It seems like this happens with drawers. So I'm just going to draw a drawer sitting here, and again, I'm not going to worry about dimensions, but people will do things like this. They'll, maybe there's the drawer front, and we won't worry about the actual construction of this drawer. They'll make the drawer side, and then because they've got a copy of that drawer side over on this side, they open the component for editing and copy the geometry within the same wrapper. And they've got a component, but the problem is, again, that's all, it's just two lumps of geometry within the same wrapper. And if you modify one, they would expect the other side to get modified as well, but that doesn't happen. And it's because this is not a component. So you have to be careful with how you're doing things. You want to make the component and copy it within its wrapper, and its wrapper. And then in this case, we'd flip that along the red. So now, whoops, let's make the modification. Then they get edited. But now if we select those parts, they can all get wrapped in a larger wrapper. I won't give it a name, but so. All right, let's see. Does anybody who's still sticking with me here have any questions?
I'm trying to think of one.
I have a question.
Yes.
An issue I've run into in the past is similar to what you just did, I've make a drawer, each left, right, front, back, bottom of the drawer are all components, and then I make them all a nested component. And then for whatever reason I decide later on, oh, I want to change the size of that drawer. I want to make it wider.
Okay.
I end up having to go in and modify each component separately and drag. I feel like there should be some really easy way to just stretch it.
Well, yeah, and let me do that with the table here. Let's sorry, there's a dog. I don't know what he's doing under my desk here. Let's say we wanted to make this table, well, pretend that's the front of it. We're going to make the table wider.
Hey, Dave, I didn't see the dog.
Oh, sorry. Skipper? You know, if I had a camera, I'd put him on. If I had a web camera, I'd let you look at him. He's a lot more interesting to look at than I am. But let's see. How do I want to approach this?
I knew you could draw fast, but I didn't know you could draw fast and delete that fast. So.
Oh, sorry. I can. Yeah, just selecting and deleting. That's pretty easy. You just hit the delete key. So if you have the nested component, like that drawer, in fact, let's do that. Let's get, here I'm going to draw a drawer in this, there's a drawer. How's that? Okay, so we want to modify the width of this drawer, let's say. It would seem like you should just be able to stretch it. The stretching tool that most people would think of is the scale tool. The problem is that it not only scales the width of the drawer, but it scales the dimensions of the parts. So you can see that the knob is now elliptical, and the sides are 15/16 inch thick, where they were originally 5/8. So scaling isn't the right tool for the job. If it's a nested component, what you need to do is you need to open it and you move the components that need to be moved. So let's say we want to make this drawer wider and to the right. Maybe we'll add a foot to the width of it. And then you can use the select tool. So I've opened the back for editing, and then I'm selecting the end of the board with the dovetails, with the pins. And oops, you know what I did? I didn't move my drawer side in the right direction. My apologies. Didn't think that really looked like 12 inches. There we go. And we can do the same thing with the front. It doesn't seem like it's as easy as it ought to be, but with a little practice you'll find that it goes quite rapidly. And the knob can just get moved 6 inches, halfway down. And so I don't know if that helps.
That does help.
Like I say, with a little practice, it gets to be pretty easy to do it. And yeah, it would be nice to be able to just stretch the thing and have everything go the way you want. The height of a drawer, for example, this one with the dovetails, it gets more involved when you've got this joinery, because maybe you want to keep the pins and the sockets the same width, but the tails are going to get to be a different width. You have to either make the move in increments. If you want to make the drawer side taller, say you want to make it 3/4 of an inch taller, well, maybe we would go up 1/4 of an inch, and then we have to do, so I'm just making left to right selections and move that 1/4 of an inch, and I just keep making selections of less and less stuff. And it doesn't matter where I grab here. Go up 3/4. So now I've just made the drawer sides 3/4 of an inch taller without modifying the width of the pins or the sockets. And you do the same. You could do the same thing with the drawer front and the drawer back to get the dovetails to fit again. That's one of those things where I would probably, if I knew I was going to have different sized drawers, well, in the case of this workbench, I knew I was going to have different sized drawers. So I drew the drawer boxes without the dovetails. I drew one drawer box without the dovetails, and then I copied it and resized it like I used the, like I changed the length of that drawer, and left the dovetails until after all the drawer copies were made, and then I had to go back and cut the dovetails on each drawer, or for each different size drawer, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's a matter of leaving some of the details until later in the project. There. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Dave, if you can go back to my earlier questions on when you make something unique. On your example, if I had just made the legs and then made the front legs unique so I can do the drawer.
Okay.
But then I wanted to go back and do the mortises on everything. Can I make them ununique and
No. No, you can't do that. So you would, like, I think what you're asking is, could you cut the, say, the dovetail on the top and the little mortise on the front legs and the wide one for the back apron, and then reconnect them to cut the front to back, or the mortises for the side aprons? No, you can't do that because
Okay, that's a good answer.
Does that make sense? So you have to think about the order of operations there. And otherwise you'll lose some of the work that you've done. So mortises for side aprons first, then you can break the relationship and put in the things that are different then between the front and back. Any other questions? It's kind of quiet here.
One of the things I'm having trouble with is just my files moving from 2015 to 16, and I'm not sure how the file structure should be on the computer.
As far as your models?
Yeah, where to keep models, where to keep components.
Well, so I have, actually in this computer now I have 3 hard drives, and 2 of them are used for storing files, and only the C drive mostly just gets programs. But you can set up a folder if you want under Preferences. And by the way, on Mac, the Preferences is found under the SketchUp menu to the left of File. But I don't remember if there's I don't think there's a place to set these files like there is on the Windows machine. So I have a default location for SketchUp models on my E drive, and you can just click on the little folder and navigate to select the location where you want to keep your folder, models. You can also keep your components. I haven't set this up on this machine, but so it's showing the C drive and just the documents folder for components and materials. I generally put those into a similar directory like the models. You want to put them someplace where you can write to those folders. Both Microsoft and Apple kind of locked up the access to the application and program files, which was good to keep people with malicious intent from loading files into your program files that might do damage, but it also makes it difficult for users to put things in, like in the program file. So in SketchUp, Oops, I get the wrong, sorry, 64-bit. So there's a components folder, for example, in the program file that includes some components that were shipped with SketchUp. Used to be that you could add to those easily, but the folders don't, by default, don't have permissions set to allow you to do that. So you have to save them somewhere else. Put them in your.
What I'm saying though is that you've got them set up under 2016. When you downloaded 16, did the stuff under 15 come over?
No. The program installs as an entirely separate program, so you don't lose anything from your previous installation. So you would set up these locations if you want to. If you've never set them, they'll just be the same default settings as you've always.
I'm setting them there in 2017. We're not going to have a problem.
No, yeah, you won't have any problem. It'll just, and again, it'll go in as a new program, which is nice. It's not like Apple products Adobe products, for example, that overwrite the previous version.
Can I just delete 2015?
You can if you, so like I have, actually, yeah, you can, because you're not saving, if you're not saving any files into those older program files, you can do that. I would make sure that you've got any settings that you might want. If you have toolbars arranged a certain way, what I do is I put when I have to do a new layout, I make a screenshot of my previous version with showing the toolbar locations, and then I import that image into the new version of SketchUp, and so I can look at, it sort of lets me look at my old version without having to go back and forth.
Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So I think I've covered almost everything about components. There was one last thing I wanted to make a comment about, that relating to using components. That is that SketchUp doesn't do tiny little faces very nicely. And if you are trying to do things like a turn knob, for example, there can be a lot of little tiny faces. If we try to measure these, you'll see that that's about 0. It's less than a 64th of an inch there. SketchUp wouldn't make that, make faces there on its own. So they can exist, as you can see there, but to get them to be there in the first place, you need to work at a larger scale. And in the same way that I pulled off the apron to work on it, like this, and make the edit, you could do that. And now for this, there isn't really a need to do it, but just to show you, I can scale this up and assume I was doing something to this thing that, let's do it on the bottom here, that would create little tiny faces Can you see it's happening to the same thing is happening to the original, even though this one is a larger one. Let's get rid of the hidden geometry there. So I just put a little tiny round over on there on a scaled up copy, delete that, and it's done here.
That's cool.
So for things like drawing the knob, I would, let's just move those back and get those out of the way. I would do something along these lines. I don't know, let's just, to keep it small, we'll just come back here. I'm going to draw a little rectangle so I have something to work on, and maybe I'm just making this knob up from kind of pulling it out of the air. Close enough for government work. Let's see here. Let's do something though to make this. Oops, it's not going to let me do that. Let's see if it'll let me do it on this one. Yep. All right. So that's going to be the profile of the knob, and I'm going to. Hey, what happened to my circle? There we go. So I'm going to draw a circle for a path for follow me, and I just deleted the face. So if I try to run follow me on this, there we are. So I've got a hole here in the top of the dome, and there's a whole bunch of it missing back here. Because the faces would be too small. So, or those edges would be too short. So I'm going to make that a component, make a copy of that, and use the scale tool to scale that up. And I'm going to go up to a factor of 100 just to be on the safe side. Probably didn't have to go that high, but here we go. So that original knob is still down there about where the cursor is, right there.
Would 1/64th square be the smallest face that we could draw?
It's about 1/1000th of an inch is the shortest length. All right, so that knob is complete. Actually, let's do this. We'll even delete that circle. And I deleted the big knob, and there's the one that I started out with, already complete, or now finished. And you can see the little tiny faces again that are about 0 inches long, less than a 64th. So, and then we would set the origin to the center of the knob so we could install it quickly like I showed earlier. All right, so
how'd you set the origin to the center of the knob?
So I'm sorry, I did that kind of quickly. So I right-clicked on the component and chose Change Axes. Now they're already there, but then I just clicked at the center here, which I drew. So I drew the knob intentionally centered on the green axis, and so its back end was at the surface that would be on the drawer front is on the red axis. And the reason I did it there, partly it was easy to lay out right there because I had the axis lines as a reference. But also, when it comes time to change the axes, I could click here and at that origin, I could click there and set the red and the green axes accordingly. So that makes it easy to set that up. And so then that knob comes in, and you see how I have hold of it. It's hard to tell from the front, but I had hold of it by that center point. And so you can easily just lock that on a point. Make that easy to use. So but I like that scaling up and then deleting the big copy rather than scaling up and scaling back down.
Yeah, that's a pretty huge takeaway of copying a component and doing something to the copy so that the original components have the geometry.
It's really a useful thing. Some years ago, a fellow was drawing a green and green inspired chessboard. So it had drawers in it for the pieces, and of course it had the exposed and rounded box joint, or the proud rounded over box joints, and cloud lifts and ebony splines on on the frame around the top, around the chessboard itself. But in doing all these little roundovers and things, he had scaled the model up and down and up and down. And actually, let me do this. I'm going to make a real quick little illustration of this. He had managed to, with his scaling up, actually let's do this. He would scale up this way, and when he'd scale down, he'd use this handle. And then the next time he needed to do something, he'd scale it up again, and he'd scale it down. And you see what's happening? The model is moving away from the origin. And when he got done, well, he got to a point where the component was several miles from the origin. So he had been working on it then, hadn't paid any attention to the fact that it was so far away, but then he hit zoom extents, and here I can see it, partly because I know where it is, but he had a little tiny line segment by the origin. And so when he hit zoom extents, it was trying to show him everything in the model, and it looked to him like his model was being deleted. Because a chessboard that's 2 miles from the origin is going to be hard to see. But it came from scaling up and scaling down several times. And having a little line segment that was too far away from the... So what I did is I dragged a selection box around the origin and hit delete. I didn't know if I'd actually got anything or not. And then when I hit zoom extents, I was able to zoom in on the chessboard itself and move it back to the origin, which you can do, let's see, 0, 0, 0 in square brackets. Gets it. So that moved the point that I'd started with by typing the coordinates in the square brackets. I got it back to the origin. All right. I think, unless anybody has any more questions, I should let you all go to sleep or something.
Thank you very much, Dave. This has been great.
Well,
Yeah, Dave, this is awesome.
my pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome too. And I'm glad that you all joined.
You certainly have saved me a lot of time.
Well, good. I hope it all sticks, and we'll figure out this recording thing see how it processes out, and if I can get this on YouTube or something. And
Sure, no problem.
we'll figure out how.
Steve, are you going to have Dave, if it works, have Dave put it up on the NCWW channel, or?
He can send it to me and I can put it up.
Okay.
There you go.
That's good. I have no idea how big this file is, so we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we can figure it out. Shouldn't be a problem.
All right. So we'll.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you,
Good night,
everybody.
Thanks.
And
Take it
see you around.
easy.
Thanks. Take care. And good luck with the snow.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. We'll see ya.